Welcome, everyone, to episode 289 of Just Joshing. I am your host, Joshua Pantelleresco. I write stuff and podcast too. Today, my guest is someone I went to for some research notes. I had the opportunity. My next book in the Cloud Diary, book 2, is going to be dealing with some trans issues. And my guest actually defended the very first trans custody case way back in 1995. It's G versus G. It's hard to find information about this case, but for reasons that are made clear in the episode. But Karen has done an awful lot for rights for men in family law, and also trans rights, and a lot of other rights she has stood up and defended over the last, when she was a lawyer, and she's actually releasing a biography soon. And this was a very cool conversation. I learned an awful lot about our history that a lot of people do not know, and this is definitely one of those conversations I'm really happy to have had on the show. This is definitely going to be a little different than what normally is done, but I feel this is such a fascinating topic. So, Karen, I'm very happy that you came on my show. Thank you very much. So, beyond that, Claudio Morgan is starting a sponsorship. I'm going to be doing giveaways starting next week. With that, I'm going to be taking another week of giveaways off, mostly because I'm quietly starting to pack. This weekend I actually started looking at my book collection and go, okay, what am I going to keep and what am I going to take with me? And you're going to see, I think a lot of people are going to see in the next little bit, a big purge. So that's started. So that's what this week's all about for me. I've done a ton of interviews for the podcast. Going forward, I think I'm about 15 weeks ahead, which, because I don't know how these next 3 months are going to go, I thought I'd prepare. But anyways, guys, let's get to that conversation with Karen after a word from our sponsor.
This episode of Just Joshing is sponsored by Indie Imprint. Indie Imprint supports creators by creators. Whether you are writing a book or creating a video game, Indie Imprint works with its clients to produce, edit, and present their projects to the world. For more information, check out their website at www.indieimprint.com.
How we'll do this. The recorder is officially on. If there's anything incriminating you'd like to say, make it good. No. No.
I don't have anything incriminating to say.
That's fine. So the best answer I ever got to this was from, I interviewed a 16-year-old pop singer. She said, I took everything valuable and I patented it. I was like, that is an excellent, incriminating answer. Right. So anyway, how are you today?
I'm great.
Yeah.
Wonderful to be in Calgary.
Yeah. So what brings you to Calgary, if you don't mind my asking?
Well, I was born here and I went to university here, and I have a lot of family and friends still here. And we're just making our way sort of halfway through Canada, visiting family and friends. So
this is kind of like a social thing for you this time around. Yes. So you're from Calgary originally. So did you live everywhere else that you're going on this tour with?
I actually lived in most of the places, yes. I went to law school in Windsor, and so
Windsor, Ontario?
Windsor, Ontario.
I'm from there.
Oh.
Yeah.
And so I have family and that live in London and Tillsonburg and Woodstock, so I started there, went up to Toronto to visit family, and then actually, originally I started in Winnipeg and had a week with Gail Asper, who is chair of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Winnipeg, of which I was a major fundraiser. And I worked with her side by side to raise money privately for that museum. And I stayed with her for a week and had a wonderful, wonderful time at the Fringe Festival and seeing family as well. And because I also grew up in Winnipeg, Gail Asper has the Order of Canada and for her work on the museum. And she has also done the foreword for my book.
Yeah.
And my book that is yet to be published and hopefully is going to come out in the new year, is about equality for men in family law cases. And it actually tracks a case that is a real case in minute by minute of the trial. And that was in 2004. And it was a case about a man who was abused physically and emotionally and financially by a woman. And so the book actually looks at how the courts address abuse of men and whether or not they get a fair shake.
So this is interesting because I grew up in the 80s and like the big thing of like from Windsor and London in particular, and I remember watching my mom and my dad going through a very, very nasty separation, but it wasn't just them. Like their friends, everybody that got married at that same time got divorced at around that same time. So I got to watch it from the outside looking in. I got to see the court brutalize some of the men. Some of them, one of them in particular, I have to say, kind of walked into it. But it's amazing how it's the one area I feel like family law from what I've seen. I don't know how much it has changed since that point. But I've seen it seems like family law especially back then did not favor men at all.
It's still, in my opinion, very much, it's gotten better, don't get me wrong, but it's still in favor of women retaining custody. I'm talking about mainly custody here, but in the G versus G case,
yes,
I was representing the man who was transitioning toward being a woman, and we won custody in that case, which was certainly a precedent-setting case. But in that case, for instance, they did not order any kind of child support, even though my client got custody.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely unheard of. If a woman gets custody, she always gets the full enchilada.
No, usually, yeah. I mean,
not usually. Always.
Yeah. No,
and the same thing happened in the case that I have recorded in my book. He didn't get child support of 3 young children. It was almost like, if we're going to grant you custody, we're going to somehow undermine the rest of your rights, and it was absurd.
So, actually, I think we should ask this question, because you didn't answer this. How does the court view a family, like legally?
They try to. They obviously They certainly appreciate the fact that you have a right to be separated from your spouse.
Yes.
And that they want to do that in the most humane way possible for primarily the children. The test is supposed to be the best interests of the child. Usually they don't like separating children by any means. They want to keep the children as stable as possible. In the G versus G case, the transsexual case that I did, one of the primary things was keeping the younger child with his sister and keeping him very stable. And that seemed to win out the day, actually, and really definitely put aside the judge's concerned about his gender dysphoria, which is what they were calling it back then.
And I think for the point of reference to the audience here, we have done a previous interview regarding that case specifically. So, which is definitely precedent saying. I think the thing that when I was researching the case, that actually was very unusual to me when I was reading it. The judge wanted the son which is who we're talking about here, and G versus G, to go with his biological mother.
No, the judge didn't want. He was obviously open, but the doctor, Dr. Elterman, had done a full what's called a level 3 report where he interviewed both parents, and the wife in this case had a partner who also lost the case for the mother because he was considered to be violent against my client and had actually shoved a suitcase into his groin, and there was some parental alienation going on, belittling the father with the children and calling him names, and so the wife made some the mother, I should say, made some very serious mistakes.
Yes.
She would have had a much better chance if she would at least stayed within the proximity of the school. She didn't choose this partner, and she also seemed to almost give up on the daughter. Pretty much, she had not seen the daughter for quite a while before the trial, and she actually wanted the court to divide the children, and that was not in anybody's best interest.
It was an interesting case, and the gentleman you're referring to, I mean, when I was reading it, he seemed like he was a dick.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
He was called boorish and juvenile, violent,
and which is the last one
was the kiss of death.
It was the kiss of death. The other two sounded kind. Yeah, based on what I read there.
The mother and the father.
No, the mother and the mother's boyfriend.
No, mother's boyfriend is the one that was considered to be violent.
No. That's what I'm saying. I think based on what I was reading, that was a very kind description.
I see.
Yeah.
I got it.
Yeah, it was a very kind description. It's not the description I would have. I realize sometimes legal niceties sometimes create a certain degree of manners. It was just when I was reading that, it was like, wow, he's a douche. And that was literally the impression I got from him. So, but. No,
and the children found him to be mean, and that was reported to the child counselor. The other thing that happened in that case that I don't think we raised sufficiently is that the Dr. Elterman had actually made a very grave mistake in not going to the school and interviewing the all of the parties at the school, including the counselor. This child had some problems and was really struggling in schools, and he just didn't bother, even though he's considered to be one of the top psychologists in British Columbia.
Which came across very careless. It came across incredibly.
Well, it's negligent.
Yeah. Actually, that is a more accurate word. Yes, on this, on that one. No, it just was because you would think if this was about the kids in particular, yet you would be looking at every aspect of the kids' environment in a way that would be like most beneficial.
So what we did is we actually had those people testify.
Yeah.
So we were well ahead of Dr. Elterman's report, and I don't think he meant to be. I can't explain why he did that. I was married to a psychologist for almost 20 years that did child custody and access cases, and it's really quite unheard of that when a child, is struggling like that, to not interview the school. Even in regular cases, but especially in this one.
Well, yeah, actually, that like I said, it seemed very strange. I mean, it was the opening. It was definitely an opening you exploited, but it was like, It was like it just there was a lot of things about that side of the case that just struck me as odd.
Yeah.
Right.
The judge in that case, it is very clear, did not like my client.
Yeah.
He took the judge took every opportunity to point out different situations where he was perhaps not as forthcoming as he could have been in providing information to the experts. That case was certainly, in my almost 20-year career as a lawyer, was most difficult because we were interviewing people from the gender dysphoria clinic and having them as witnesses. When I was hired, I did not have this was 24 years ago, and I certainly didn't have the information that I have now, not just because of the case, but because we've evolved so much in our world of understanding what it's like to be a transsexual, and some appreciation for their rights. And so it was I think 5 doctors altogether testified, and that's highly unusual in a custody case. Flying them into out of Vancouver and into the community where the case was, and was certainly a big deal. Fortunately, not all of the people charged for coming over, which was very nice of them.
It sounded like, again, just based on what I was reading about the case, it sounded like your client had a lot of sympathy outside of the judge.
Yeah,
he had a lot of sympathy in the direction, so that at the very least, a lot of people wanted to make sure that he had the best fighting chance possible, which I think speaks a lot to how humane. I was surprised how compassionate a lot of people really are when given the opportunity to be. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go into you real quick here.
Sure.
You guys, you talk about you're a really big advocate of human rights, and so where did that come from? Like, because not everybody, I mean, a lot of people say they validate human rights, but you've actually fought for it, right?
Fought. I actually, when I wrote my book on representing men in family law, I had an interview at a writing conference. I actually wrote my book as a screenplay first, and then I wrote it as a book, because in the interviews that I got at this writers' conference, they wanted to know why I ended up representing men. I didn't represent men more than women per se. That's who came through the door.
Yeah.
And I certainly advocated as strongly as I possibly could, but I was asked why that was that I was so fervent in my resolve to give equality in family law. And I said, well, that's very easy. I said that when I was 10 years old, my parents had a very, very acrimonious divorce in Trenton, Ontario, and we were airlifted out of Trenton and put at my grandparents, my maternal grandparents' house, and there was violence involved with the separation, and but I never thought that my dad actually got a real fair hearing in any way. There was no hearing. A decision was taken. My dad was a navigator in the Air Force, and a decision was taken through the commanding officer that we would be separated from my father, and we weren't even allowed to see him before we left. And so it was completely taken out of my mother's hands too. And so I think as a young child, I saw how hard that was on children and on parents to all of a sudden one day be an involved, loving parent, and the next day your children are 2 provinces away.
Even sometimes 2 cities away. This goes back like in my
67.
67 for. I'm gonna go back to like my personal age, which is 87. 20 years later, my dad actually got me, and my mom got my sister.
Oh, so they divided the children.
We actually got the ability to choose. We probably should not have chosen at the ages we were forced to choose, but we chose. We had the right to choose. I was 8. She was like 7. Like it was just.
That's very young.
Yeah.
To be able to choose.
Yeah, it was just the circumstance.
In terms of the case law, 12 is usually the age where
there were a lot of. The separation was very, very unusual in a lot of ways, and I won't go into it on the air here, but I remember this because my dad was looking at one point to possibly get Rachel, my sister, to come in like to together, but he was told by the lawyer, you have a shot at getting her, but you probably lose me.
Yeah.
Probably would lose me in the process.
Yeah.
And so he
was too frightened to lose everything.
It was just there. Well, it was no one's situation. Like, the odds were not, and then the lawyer was very frank about it. The odds aren't in your favor on this at all, and you could do it, but chances of getting both were virtually none.
Lawyers have an incredible responsibility in family law cases to advise what people's chances are of winning in a custody case.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's the hardest thing to do is to advise a client that they're not going to be able to succeed and to work on a joint custody arrangement where they get as much access as possible, but actually give up the hope that they're going to win full custody. And in the G versus G case, the hardest thing that I had to give advice on is whether or not he should continue to dress up in front of the children. He had been dressing up in front of the children, not 100% of the time, but some of the time, and he had even taken the kids out and enjoyed some activities with them, and that became very clear that, to me, is that we could possibly lose custody if we continued with that stance that he had been with the gender dysphoria clinic for quite some time, and they were, of course, trying to normalize dressing, and we basically had to set aside his rights to becoming a woman in the program. He was accepted into the program in terms of transitioning, but he had to put that on hold, and he actually had not dressed in front of the children for some 10 months prior to the trial. So we were able to come to the court and say, we have decided that in the best interests of the children, we are going to not do that.
We talked about this, I think, towards the end of the interview we did in private, and I'll bring this up here. Like you did what you had to do. I mean, if that had been maybe 10 years further down the line, you probably could have had a better stance with the clothes. Unfortunately, this was 1990. I want to say 1995, 1996, something like that. And it was like the very earliest stages of the transgender movement. So at that time, there was a lot of. It would have probably. You're probably right. Like that, and that's just the way it was.
Yeah.
Right.
And if I weighed the options. Ultimately, it was my client's decision, not mine.
Absolutely.
But I certainly can be very forceful in terms of what my views are. And most importantly, we had a mom here that was not fit, in my view, in the circumstances. And so it's a lot easier when you have two really good parents, and so the children are not going to be in danger if the other side wins. But in this case, there was definitely a chance that they would be harmed, that the parental alienation that was going on against my client was very severe, and it was recognized by the court in that regard. I think that in all the circumstances at that time, we made the right decision, but it was still heart-wrenching.
Yeah, well, it's the reality of the situation is sometimes is and this is just life in general. You got to make sacrifices sometimes to get what you want, and
he was prepared to do that.
No, he sounded like a really good guy, right?
He was a great parent.
Yeah, he sounded like and taking that step. It's asking a lot, but personally, it's a personal discomfort sacrifice. But I also understand, if I were to have kids, right, that would my perspective would be they would come first no matter what, even if that meant my own discomfort would be a factor because I didn't bring them I brought them into the world.
That's right.
Right. It's my job to make sure I do everything I can to provide the best possible life possible, and that's. It sounds idealistic from my point of view because I don't have kids right now, but that's what my dad was like. That's what my grandmother was like. So,
I actually never had children.
Yeah.
Myself, just didn't happen for me, and I remember one case when I was practicing in Vancouver. I had one custody for a father of 3 kids, and we were in the hallway of the Vancouver courthouse, and the mom was, of course, really angry at me in particular, and she screamed at me that, "You don't know my children, you don't even have any children." And I don't know how she found out I didn't have children, but somehow that was a bit of a shot that somehow I couldn't understand children, and I don't think that's true. That you don't have to have a brain tumor to do brain surgery, and I think if you do enough family law, you're compassionate, and you listen to both sides, if not 5 sides, to a story. I did a lot of mediation as well. I was trained as a mediator in civil cases and in family law under the British Columbia roster. And so I always tried, even if I was just representing one of the parties in a normal situation, we would have 4-way meetings, and at one time I was hired by another lawyer to represent him in his own divorce, and we'd done many 4-way meetings together, we'd done mediations together, and I said, "Why did you choose me out of all the lawyers in he could have had his pick of lawyers?" And he said, "Well, I've always noticed that you have 2 speeds. You are, in one speed, you are this great mediator and negotiator in 4-way meetings. But then if you need to go into the next speed, you can be a barracuda and no holds barred, scorched earth. And you get the job done in court, and you win."
So note to self: never piss you off. Gotcha. No, but it's good.
You have to have both as a good lawyer. And the tricky bit as a lawyer is that you have to recognize very quickly what kind of case you have. Is it a case that you can actually negotiate, stay out of court, do something between the lawyers, or even if somebody isn't represented, have some kind of a negotiated settlement? Is it a case where maybe we could mediate, or but a lot of times you had to ask them, how much justice can you afford? And then decide which, because not everybody has the bank account to do a 3-week trial. Well, most people don't.
And the reality of the situation is family law, like especially when we get to the divorces, are very messy in court once they get and once they actually
expensive.
And they're messy, they're expensive. There's a lot of pain. If it gets to the courtroom, it's a lot of pain. Now, if you can negotiate out of the courtroom, even the lawyers are happier because it's far less of a headache, right? Then it's just about dotting I's and crossing T's, and there might be sticking points, but they're not major ones, and there's usually compromise can be worked out, right? And whereas if you go to the courtroom, that usually means that somebody somewhere, it's going to get nasty. It's going to get very nasty.
There's a winner and a loser in court.
Yeah.
And it's the court costs are so prohibitive. And what I usually tried to do is I tried to put my client's money up front in the interim application, and especially when it came to custody, because if you don't win on the interim application, you will not have a hope in hell of winning in a trial, because they like to keep the status quo. And it's a year to 2 years before you ever get into a trial. And usually lawyers are saying, this is not winnable by this point. And most important, or not most importantly, but the reality of the situation is they've blown their legal budget on the interim application, and all assets are frozen if they indeed even have any assets. In one of my cases the case that I did my screenplay and book on, I actually had to take a mortgage out against the house before the wife put a lien on the house. And I had to wait, a couple of years to get paid for a very involved trial. But at least we could proceed. And in that case, again, the children were in danger. It wasn't a case of two good parents here. So
that's unfortunately just that's usually how that goes. And like with the big stuff, there's usually something really at stake one way or the other. And sometimes, and going back to what we were talking about earlier, it like having that ability to be a velvet glove, but also have like a mace of steel if need be is. I don't think it's just essential for just being a lawyer. I think it's essential even for being an artist of any kind, because knowing
when to switch gears.
Yeah, because it's important, because one of the things that artists definitely have to learn how to deal with is sometimes they're too nice. I learned that lesson the hard way myself. Yeah. Like it's an inevitable. You have to be an asshole sometimes. That's just the way it is. Right? Most of the time you try to be as reasonable as you try not to have to show any ruthlessness. If you can avoid it, I try. But sometimes that's all people respond to.
No, and lawyers don't always like their clients.
Yes.
You try your absolute best for them, but somewhere along the line or at the end of the day, you know
what you're dealing with.
You're not buddies necessarily,
no. And that's okay too, as long as there's. Actually, that's a good question. I should ask this one. So, I know it's not important that you necessarily like your client to represent them. How about respect? Because the reason I bring that up is because I know if I'm dealing with somebody that I don't like, I can do that. But if I had a real issue with someone's integrity, or I have an issue with someone's
that's very hard.
Yeah.
Lawyer.
No, I imagine
my initial spiel to clients is that if you lie to me, you will be fired. And I will find out. It may take me a little while, but I will find out you're lying to me. And you cannot tell the court why you're withdrawing from a case, but they can surmise very quickly that that's what is at issue. And it's obviously to your detriment. And I used to say to them something my mother used to say, and that's, if you always tell the truth, you don't have to remember what you said.
I go by
when
that
person. People spin tales, and they can't remember just exactly who they told what to whom, and it unravels.
Usually you give yourself away. I find that has always been the case. Like if you observe someone long enough, you can figure out. Okay, what do you really want, and why am I here? And and if they're honest, and like I said, you don't necessarily like somebody, but if they're honest with you, you can respect that, right? And that's easy, and it's like, okay, I may not like you, but I can deal with this. I can respect this. But the moment those lines are crossed, I imagine that is the end of it. So let's go this direction. Why are you writing this? Why did you write a screenplay first, and then why are you going into?
Well, I retired very young. I had a car accident when I was 36 that I injured my back quite badly. In the last trial that I did, my back went into serious spasm, and I had to be laid out on a couch, and I couldn't even get up. And I ended up taking some time off, and that time off turned into a longer period of time, and I had been doing some real estate investing and developing, all on top of my practice, and I wanted, at the end of the day, I could not find pleasure in the practice of law at that time. I had done this really horrific case that's part of my book, where the judge was abusive to all of the parties. He was screaming and yelling for the better part of 6 days. I just got to the point where I just thought, do I want to be part of this kind of system where there is no justice in the justice system? It's a legal system. It's not a justice system. Most people can't afford it, and financially they can't afford it. Emotionally, they can't afford it, and the children are definitely weaponized against the and pitted against the each other, sometimes the siblings, and I just was very burned out by the time I'd finished this particular trial, and I was just going to take 3 to 6 months off and regroup and maybe just do mediation or collaborative law. That 6 months turned into a year, and then I decided to, I had started writing the screenplay, and this is in 2005, and I really enjoyed writing and doing my other real estate work, and but I didn't want to go back to that kind of acrimonious lifestyle, because you were always in someone else's hell all the time, and on any given day I would have 20 to 30 cases, and everybody was in crisis. at the same time, and you had to shift gears all the time, and I just didn't.
That would be really hard, because not one case would be okay. Maybe you could do one, maybe two, maybe three. When you get to that point, it's like, oh my gosh, okay, what's going on in here? Okay, what's the headset? What's going on with the that would be incredibly draining. But just emotionally, because I mean,
I did appeal work too, which is a whole other level of litigation, and I actually enjoyed appeal work much more, because you didn't have so many affidavits, and drafting people's stories, and the minutia that you had to get into. It was more broad brush strokes, and you didn't have usually you didn't have the concern as you do in the trial level of getting paid. Sometimes, people don't appeal cases, unless they can really afford to do them. And not that getting paid was the first and foremost thing on my agenda. Quite often it should have been more a priority for me, because sometimes I finance people's litigation. In the case that I did in my final case of my career, I ended up forgiving about $30,000 worth of legal fees, and I financed the rest for him, because it was such a serious case that the children would be in danger. And you just make those decisions, but at the time, but at the same time, you still have secretaries to pay, and you still have
you have your own
paralegals, and you still have all of these ongoing expenses. You can't do it for everybody. That's for darn sure.
Well, no, you can't. Everybody. I mean, and you have to eat too. Let's be honest. At some point, you have. I mean, you have to remember. I can't just live off tuna and crackers, right? That's I'm defending you, right? But I mean,
I was never down to the count that badly. It also becomes a source of frustration for you that I had a case where I actually won the case that was complicated, and this person taxed my bill, which means they have the court review your legal bill. And they even hired a lawyer from Vancouver to do that. And they came over, they looked at all the boxes of litigation, they looked at the retainer agreement, and this guy was an expert in this area. And he said after about an hour, he came into my office and said, "This is the best retainer agreement I have ever seen, and I'm going to recommend to my client that he pay your bill."
Yeah.
But to have to go through that, it was really embarrassing, and you just felt like you'd been sucker punched.
Yeah, because it's not even really about the money at that point. It goes back to something I said earlier.
Pride.
It's pride, yes.
Pride.
No. It's pride, but it's also to some degree it's also integrity.
Yes.
Right. Because I've become this way when I do business with people. I don't always get it right. I make mistakes on like sometimes things happen. But generally speaking, if I say I'm going to do something, I do it because I gave you my word. That means something. If I didn't believe I was going to do it, right, I wouldn't tell you I do it. Right. And it's like you're even taking one step further. You've written it down. You fully intend to follow through. Everything.
It's the first thing I do is retainer.
And
if I don't think my client is capable of paying in this situation, I actually had his father sign the retainer agreement so that I had another person on the hook because it was a complicated trial.
Absolutely, but like I said, it's ultimately an integrity thing. You right? That's what I think even more so than pride. It's just like because it's about yeah, there's pride. It's about integrity, but it's a credibility issue on both sides, right? It's about making sure that they respect what you're doing for them, and in turn, it's about also them keeping their word. That's right. And again, shit happens. It does. I mean, that's life, but I can understand why
I even had people pay, $100 or $200 a month, to pay off their bill and things like that to help them out. I actually, for most of my career, did not do legal aid. I chose to help the working poor, people who earn $12, $15 an hour, who would not get legal aid because they had this, very meager paying job. They wouldn't get it. And the other thing is that in British Columbia for a lot of years, they wouldn't give legal aid to men. Even if they had primary care of the kids, they would not give it to men. And I really disagreed with their belief or their criteria, I should say. I had enough clients, and there were lots of lawyers that certainly would do legal aid, and so it wasn't a question that people were not being represented by good counsel. And I just, as I mentioned, I had this car accident when I was 36, and it took me a year to get to the point where I was actually able to work 4 days a week, and I had to make that work.
Yeah.
In terms of my practice and my responsibilities to other people.
But you seem to have figured it out eventually.
Yes.
Yes, yep. You figured it out, and it worked out. So, all right. So I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and I think I like to think we have an interview. I don't know what you think about that, but one, just a personal question, because you're writing about non-fiction stuff. Are you ever going to do fiction? The reason I ask that, because based on what we've just been talking about, you definitely understand how stories are constructed.
Oh, I've always been a very big reader.
Yeah.
And I belonged to a book club for almost 20 years in Nanaimo, and that had been going on for over 35 years, and it was a Canadian literature group, and so I would say I'm very well read, and I enjoy stories. I have just actually finished a story that is going to be part of an anthology. It's a 15-page story, and it's supposed to be fiction, but it was loosely based on a story about my grandmother, and who was abandoned at the Banff Springs Hotel, and I belong to the Coquitlam Writers Group, and we put together an anthology that's based on food, and that's supposed to be the theme through the short story. So I had to fictionalize most of it because my grandmother didn't talk about this whole black history of George Hamilton.
Fair enough.
So I had to make up most of it, and the story's called Satiated.
Satiated. Okay, gotcha. So yeah, you're definitely going in that direction eventually. So, but okay. So I'll actually ask a second question, and then we'll get to the wonderful wrap up stuff here. The second question is, what do you enjoy more, fiction or nonfiction? Because I could see the advantages to both.
That would be my opinion.
Yeah.
I love both.
Yeah.
And but if I'm watching something on BritBox or Netflix, I like the true stories better, like The Making of a Murderer or versus Kavanaugh QC and BritBox, which is more fictional, but I love any kind of courtroom drama.
Okay. No, the reason I bring this up is one of the reasons I do this podcast is I get to hear people's stories, like real stories,
right,
which are always fascinating no matter who I'm across the table from, right? So I enjoy the nonfiction, but when I write, I like fiction. Because I like coming up with crazy worlds where I can actually write about unicorns spotting rainbows and talking and winged things. I like this. I do like that. I do need my silly, or it doesn't. It's not me. But there's something about a real story that feels really satisfying to actually
tune your brain and funnel that energy.
Yeah.
You wanted to ask more some personal things. One in terms of background, and just quickly. When I graduated in 1986 from Windsor, I went to Halifax to work for. At the time, I was married to another law student, and I went out there and I interviewed with a woman named Nancy Bateman, and she was considered to be the best family lawyer in the Maritimes. And so I said, if I get hired by Nancy Bateman, I'll move to Halifax. And she actually made me an offer, and so I ended up working with her. She eventually went on to the Court of Appeal. And
so I've heard that name. I was wondering where I heard that from.
Yeah, amazing lawyer.
Yeah.
And so I stayed in Halifax for 4 years, but while I was there, I was elected to be on the steering committee of the National Association of Women in the Law, which is a watchdog on lawmakers by women lawyers and women law students. And I was on that steering committee in Ottawa for the 2 years during Reach Lake, and also for the decriminalization of the abortion law. So very, very heady times, and very interesting.
You've quietly been playing a role in just all kinds of human rights for the.
Well, not singly.
No,
but as part of a group.
Well, no, but I mean, just talk about like the G versus G case, which I won't name the clients here, but if everyone wants to look up that, it's a very interesting read. The fact that you've helped donate to the Museum of Human Rights. You dealt with I helped fundraise.
Yeah,
fundraise, right?
I got rich people to donate.
Fair enough. But you fundraise, like you very quietly, or maybe not so quietly, have had your hand in human rights for a very, very long time.
Well, I also applied when Mary Clancy went to Parliament in Halifax. I applied to teach her courses at Mount St. Vincent University in the legal status of women and a second course in family law. And my background had been taking a degree in education, so I had some teaching experience. And I also had taught on an Indigenous reserve in Alberta. So I beat out eight lawyers in that job. I'm not sure how, because I only had 2 years experience, but
sometimes it's how it works out.
Yeah,
sometimes.
And I interview. I interview well.
That must have been. I won't argue that point. That must have been an experience, just to be like, because I've.
Well, there are no textbooks at the time on the legal status of women.
Yeah.
There were in family law issues, but this wasn't in a law school. This was as part of women's studies, actually, at the time.
Yeah.
And so it was a real challenge because she was elected to Parliament in just in December, and the law school library was closed down and the courthouse library was closed down, and I was trying to get together, articles to teach, and I really enjoyed teaching university. When I moved to BC in 1990, one of the biggest factors in making that decision was my family all lived in Alberta and BC, and but I really had a hard time giving up teaching university. So
would you do it again?
At this point?
Well, even if it's just maybe coming and doing a speech, like a presentation once in a while. Yeah. Maybe full time. Maybe your full time days might be done, but I could still see you doing presentations.
Yeah. And I continue to have a strong relationship with Gail Asper, and she is actually trying to put together a human rights museum in Tel Aviv, and looking for fundraising opportunities there. I'm not Jewish myself, but I actually taught art in a Jewish care home as another part of my lovely history. I learned all about the Jewish culture, and I even at one time considered becoming a Messianic Jew.
Really?
I went to a Messianic synagogue. I lived part-time in Palm Springs, and they had a synagogue there for Messianic Jews. Do you know what a Messianic Jew is?
I mean, I might be completely wrong on my definition, but
it's kind of a hybrid between Christianity and Judaism.
Because I think what it is they acknowledge the Messiah, but they still practice a very, very, like the old Torah law. I think that's what the definition is. I could be wrong, and I have no problem being made look foolish on my own podcast. But that's I think what that is. Because again, Messianic usually ties to like a belief in a Messiah of some kind. So that's why I think it is. Am I right, or am I striking out?
Not quite, but that's okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
I didn't become one.
Yeah,
I actually belong to the Unitarian Church, which is not based on the Bible at all, and it has. It's more of a fellowship, and it's based on social justice, equality, and the environment. And it is it goes back many, many years, and it's my husband and I belong to that, and it's been really, really helpful. And they actually have some talks on transgender issues, and for instance, one whole sermon was on the Winnipeg strike and all of the horrible things that happened to the people who decided to strike there, and but I met Gil Asper when I was actually practicing in Halifax, and we've been friends for over 30 years, and we've stayed in contact, and having just spent a week with her while I was in Winnipeg. I'm also very interested in mental health issues, and I have mental health issues myself, and that was one of the reasons why I ended up kind of staying retired. And I believe very strongly in promoting awareness on mental health issues, because there's still a long, long ways to go to...
And that was most of my conversation with Karen Hamilton. We had for another 20 minutes, give or take. I thought basically that this was a good spot to end it. There's definitely a lot more to Karen. She was a very, very incredible interview all the way through. I thought I want to thank her here publicly, because she's definitely helped me with my research for my next book. I cannot thank her enough for that. I love the opportunity to chat with her. It was great. So Karen, you are welcome anytime you want, and when you release your book, definitely come back. I would love to talk to you again. Her book is called Humbling of a Lawyer. It talks about one of her last cases, which is definitely a must read. It's one of the things that unfortunately did not make this interview, but that will definitely be saved for another time. Outside of that, that will do it for this episode of Just Joshing. If you want to support the podcast, you can do so in a number of different ways. You can support my sponsors. IndieImprint.com is the place if you're an independent creator, whether you're working on a book, a video game, an album, you name it. They will help you edit, present it, and bring it out to the world. Definitely check them out. Subscribe to my podcast, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Podomatic. I am everywhere. My books, Watcher, Stormdancer, and Wandering God, soon. The Cloud Diver, soon. Alice Zero. They'll be out shortly. I have merchandise coming soon. I'll let you guys more into on that. Above all else, though, thanks for listening. I'll see you guys on Thursday. And until then, stay inspired.
Josh.